what I thought.
Do you know what's funny though? On Sunday morning, I was like, "What chapter am I?" Before I always go early, and because sometimes I study because it's at the end of the chapter. If it's at the beginning of the chapter, it's easy to remember. But because it's like 25 and 35, Luke 14.
That's right. Because first week was the same chapter, different verse.
Oh yeah, it was the beginning.
Yeah.
We talk about being salty dogs.
From who was that? Was that
AJ Swoboda?
That was AJ Swoboda.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh man. Should we start with this? Is going to be an interesting episode because in this last week, Stephen and I were at a pastor's conference.
Yes.
We were. We obviously have the sermon. I could see there being a chance we talk about Israel Hamas.
Ooh, yeah. I was thinking about the same thing. End times type stuff. Like,
yeah. And then you and I listened to a crazy podcast that we should probably just not bring up.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe next week so we can process. And because I haven't finished it yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We'll save it.
But before we dive into it, I just want to, because Stevie said that he likes when we talk about Lord of the Rings.
Oh,
and so
yes.
Hello, Stevie. So I did start reading the book for the first time in my life.
Ooh.
As I told you yesterday, a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's been blowing my mind for how much stuff is not in the movies that's in the books.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's crazy. Like, I would say like I'm a quarter of the way through the book. It's like 500 pages. So I think I'm like 100 and something in. They haven't even met Aragorn yet. And they're like marching through the woods and they're doing it on ponies. And like the whole scene in the movie where the Black Rider is like attacking them in the woods when they hop on the ferry. I'm like, that doesn't even happen in the book.
Yeah.
Maybe it happens later on or something. I don't know.
That was the first scene that they filmed. The scene on the road in the movies.
Like when they're walking up the road and
get
off the road and they jump into underneath the roots and stuff. Because that part happens, but it's afterwards when,
Buckleberry Ferry.
Yeah.
And then they run. Yeah.
And then Mary doesn't even join them until like later on when they reach the ferry.
Yeah.
And then they spent like the guy that they run away from at the farm with the dogs.
Yeah.
Like he was like a prominent character in the books. It's just so funny. Anyways, I just want to stay for any LOTR fans out there. I'm joining your ranks. That I'm gonna see if I can finish the whole series and then Silmarillion.
Yeah. Let me know when you do the Silmarillion and we can read it together.
Okay. We'll do like a Bible study.
Of the Silmarillion. I do need to reread it, or I haven't finished it. I started it a long time ago.
Yeah. But it's been fun. It's better. Usually I've been a movie guy, but I think with books you have so much more detail.
You started in the right season though, for sure.
Yeah.
The fall.
This was to start reading the books.
Yeah. This is the good season.
Like it's raining outside.
Yeah.
We met little hobbits and hobbiton and
yeah.
And I didn't know that Frodo shared a birthday with Bilbo. No idea. That the big party at the beginning of the movie, it was supposed to be for Frodo too. It was a combined birthday party.
But
not Peter Jackson,
movies.
What do you do?
Yeah.
I get it though. Movies are different. I mean, I love the movies, so it's fascinating. But anyways, let's talk about being a salty Christian.
Yeah. So I was reading it this week, and the thing that stood out to me the most from the parable, because we talk about we're at the end of Luke 14.
Luke 25:35. I think the salty verse is verse 35.
Yeah. Salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again?
Yeah.
I made a funny meme about that once. I'll have to share it with you.
Okay, I want to see it.
The interesting thing with me for when I was reading this, just kind of reflecting on the other parables that we had looked at, a lot of them are very much like, Jesus talking about being a vineyard or sheep and a shepherd and all this stuff that is so much, I think, relatable to people in that time. Like people were shepherds, people were. The interesting thing I thought with this one is that he's talking about like an army or building a foundation and all these things that are like, those aren't like poor people things.
Yeah.
Like not everyone's like, oh yeah, duh, my army of 20,000, So it was an interesting way. It seemed like maybe it had a different audience than the other ones.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. And I talked about it a little bit yesterday, but one of my favorite things about Jesus in this passage is he says he has a large crowd following him. So we don't know what that means. It could be hundreds, it could be thousands. We have no idea. But it's like the peak in his vocational ministry is in like, he's really popular. He's healing people. And the Pharisees are still, I think, at that period curious about him. But Jesus basically says, hey, this is what it takes to be my follower. And I think when he has all those people around, it just blows my mind. Because he's not like tiptoeing around people like, oh, and yesterday I kind of made the joke about mega churches and stuff. It's like, hey, today's day and age, if you have 1,000 people showing up at a park or something, we'd be like, hey, like, let's start a $10 million capital campaign. Let's build a building. Let's do this thing. And granted, I know this is the era that Jesus is in, and I'm not saying anything against capital campaigns. I just find it curious and humorous that in that moment, Jesus isn't like, hey, we're going to expand services. We're going to do this. He says, hey, this is what it takes to be my follower. And I think he probably, we don't know, but I think he probably lost some people that day.
Yeah.
They were like, wait, hold up.
Yeah.
Like that's a lot more than I was anticipating.
Yeah.
And he goes on with those illustrations of, the army and stuff like that. And I just find it highly fascinating.
Yeah.
And then he ends with the salty thing. And I was talking to my wife yesterday afterwards. I was like, it almost it doesn't add up. Jesus saying, hey, you want to be a committed follower. And then at the end of that chapter, it's like that tagline verse of, the salt.
Yeah.
Be the salt of the earth. If you lose saltiness, like what's... And so then my thought was like, well, what does it really mean to be the salt of the earth? And this kind of goes to what Professor Dr. A.J. Swoboda last week, who's a professor at Bushnell University and was also served quite a while as a pastor. And he quoted someone else, but I'll quote him quoting someone else. And he said that the church is called to be the salt of the earth, not the honey of the earth. And I think we kind of get those things confused.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know. What do you think? What does it mean to be the salt of the earth? Because usually, we have like a spiritual example like that. And it's kind of like Christianese, like go be the salt. But what does it mean practically? How does it change the way that we live our life?
Yeah. I like that comparison between salt and honey for a couple of reasons. They're both used for the same thing. Like you use them both in cooking or culinary, whatever,
Sure.
They're both meant to be consumed. One is a rock, like one is like a mineral that comes from the earth. And the other one is something, that bees make that's a liquid and whatever. And I like what I can't remember if AJ said this too, but I know you said it yesterday, talking about it's important to, like salt can be a little abrasive, like it can be pretty coarse, but it's meant to enhance things. Part of its characteristic as a culinary device is to enhance the flavor of things, but like too much is bad and not enough isn't good either. Yeah. I think
it gives flavor.
Yeah. It gives flavor and it brings out flavor in things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, yeah, I'm trying to come up with a way to put this. I feel like, I guess if we continue going with this comparison of salt and honey, they can both be misused, I think.
Over-salted popcorn is the worst.
Oh, yeah. I'd say over-salted most things is the worst.
It's true, yeah.
But I was like, under-salted things is the worst. We were when we were picking up baby Lincoln from the hospital, the hospital fed us, and I was like, oh, you got fish tacos? That sounds
hospital
great.
food. Oh, you ordered fish tacos at the hospital, Bryce? What were you thinking?
Salmon. I wasn't thinking. I was
my heavens.
tired and hungry. They were really good, minus the fact that I think they actively removed all salt from the fish tacos. They're the most unsalted things I've ever, and I couldn't find salt anywhere.
Bryce, I'm just amazed you ordered fish tacos from the hospital.
There's like a restaurant in the hospital that
but it's a hospital. Fish tacos?
Yeah, I don't know.
Amazing. Man. Respect, though.
They were good. They were well done. Yeah.
Just missing salt, though.
A little dry, but missing salt.
Yeah.
I've always found that verse, if a salt loses its saltiness. Because like salt can't lose its saltiness.
There's a bunch of different theories.
Yeah.
One of them is like they used it for like preservation or something.
Yeah.
Or like eventually when salt was at its final end, it was like turned into some sludge, and it was like unusable.
Yeah.
But maybe Jesus also knew that salt can lose its flavor, and he's like, hey, it's either you're in or you're out. Dude, actually, now that I think about that, because in that context of Luke 14, Jesus is saying to his followers, or the people who are following him, hey, you got to be 100% in.
Yeah.
Because the salt I always thought it didn't make sense, but maybe, this is just now a theory that I just thought of 2 seconds ago, Jesus knows that salt can't lose its flavor. So he's saying, it's either you're my follower or you're not.
Yeah.
You can't just be like, you know.
Yeah. Like wishy-washy with it.
Yeah, it's either you're bringing flavor to people or you're bland, and that's fascinating right there. What does it mean? Like, I've thought, like, practically as a church community, like, what can we give to our community? And this is something that AJ touched on as well, Dr. AJ Swoboda last week, and it's something I've been reflecting on, that the church should be a place, again, it has a little bit of a bite, it's got flavor, and it should be a place where you can have difficult conversations, where typically in church communities, again, I'm not saying 100%, but typically in church communities, we avoid having difficult conversations, and we sweep conflict under the rug. But what if people looked into church communities and they saw, like, hey, look at that vibrant group of people that are able to have really difficult conversations? Because I think today, like, what can the gift be that the church gives back to our community? And I think that could be one in our culture today. Because, as we've talked about before, social media, you usually spend time with people who view the world the exact same way as you do.
Right.
And you can find that tiny little niche community.
You don't have to find it.
It finds you.
Social media gives it to you.
It's in the algorithm.
They're like, oh, you want to, like, I listened to a podcast that I was like, oh, that's an interesting title. I'll play this. This is on YouTube. And then now, like, all my feed is like stuff that's adjacent to that. And I'm like, what? Like, yeah. You community is forced upon you.
100%. Well, it's funny because there's a church plant that's coming to Salem, and I was like, oh, I don't know, there's another church coming to Salem. I just want to check it out, and so I clicked it once, just like scoping out what the church was and stuff, and I was like, oh, that's cool. I moved on with my life, and now in my news feed, like every third thing, I think they pay for some sponsored stuff too. Yeah. So like the algorithm's like, oh, you clicked on this, so like every third post is like, hey, here's this new church. And I'm like, oh gosh, I just want to leave me alone.
I wish that's the thing when people digress for a hot second here. When people talk about like AI taking over, I'm like, it's not quite there yet, because it's like, in your case, it would know like, oh, this guy's a pastor. He doesn't want all these ads about this new church. He already has one. Yeah. Or like, I bought rain boots the other day. And
you just get advertisements for rain boots after you buy rain boots?
I'm like, I already bought the rain boots. I don't need the advert. Like, save your advertising money and use it somewhere else. Yeah. Anyways. But no, I think that's true. You're either in or out. Like, you're either salt or you're not. Yeah. You know? I think that's a really good.
And that's a really tough concept to grapple for a lot of people, specifically in our country. And we talked about some stats yesterday. And I think in Oregon, 2004, it was like 76% claimed to be Christian. Yeah. And then 10 years later, 2014, it went down to 61%. Yeah. And that's the most recent study that I've seen. So that was 10 years ago.
10 years ago. Yeah.
So if the same progression continues, we're in the probably mid 40s.
Mid 40s. Yeah.
And then once you hit below 50%, then I think it even speeds up even more. Yeah. Until then, you just kind of have your base. But then again, in my mind, for the future of the gospel in our state and really country, you have to weed off all the people who weren't really in the first place. Yeah. Because I think for the most part, they are the ones who have created the most. Yeah. I don't know.
Maybe we should
discord in the church.
Yeah. Maybe we should take a second here to digress into a hot button issue.
Oh, snap.
I think.
Let's get it. It's taken how many minutes has it been before we've done?
Like 14.
Oh, nice. All right, we're in. Let's go.
Okay, so.
And this is what being salty is. We have these types of conversations.
Totally.
And that's one of the reasons we started the podcast.
And I think, and before we get into this, I think something that's really important for Christians that I don't want to say historically we do bad at, but we're not the best at, is that you can have a disagreement with someone and you can have a difference of opinion with someone, but do so very lovingly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know we're in kind of like we're in a little bit of a cultural climate right now where that is really hard to do. Mm-hmm. Where if you have a different opinion than someone else on any topic, people think you're attacking them personally. So I think it's partially our responsibility to make sure that you're not attacking someone.
Yeah.
You can attack their ideas all day long. That's fine. You don't have to attack the person.
Yeah.
For one.
You have to have discernment as well. Just
There's some conversations that you can just like, we got a comment on one of our YouTube videos.
Yes, we did.
And maybe
we made it.
Not a good comment, but there's sometimes where it's like, you can just tell like we don't need to have this conversation. You know, like it's not going to go anywhere.
No benefit will come from response or whatever.
So a hot topic issue is, especially with, I think about this fairly frequently with a lot of like the stats that we talk about. And I think, you know, I've grown up in the church. And so I've seen this happen a lot where someone does something that's very obviously not what you should be doing as a follower of Jesus. And they're in the church, sometimes deep in the church or in leadership or on an elder board or a deacon or something. And they do something that's very obviously wrong.
Yeah.
But there doesn't seem to be accountability. And you're like, how could a follower of Jesus do that? And we talked about this before in other episodes about, like, we can only take grace in hindsight. But like, what is it like? And I think...
Are you talking about church discipline?
I'm talking about church discipline, but also talking about in this era that we live in, it seems like there's a lot of people that are in churches that are, I mean, this is a huge topic because I know we, talked about maybe getting into Israel Hamas a little bit, and Francis Chan released a really interesting video that has nothing to do with Israel Hamas. They had planned it beforehand, and it just so happened to come out right around the same time.
Okay.
But the scripture does talk about like the love of many growing cold, and people and having wolves in sheep's clothing and false prophets and all these things.
Yeah.
That while it's not ours to judge someone else's salvation and their relationship with Christ, because that's a very personal thing. But I myself look at people sometimes and I'm like, do you really believe what's like?
Yeah.
Are you really following what's written?
I feel like there's like 5 conversations in that.
I know. Sorry. Well, I would say something and realize, I got to pull this in.
You're right. This is the important thing that we kind of break these things down and discuss them. On the church discipline side of things, I think you are correct where too much political influence, and when I say the word political, I'm not talking about American politics. I'm talking about the politics of a church.
This happened at the pastors' conference again from AJ Swoboda.
Yeah. When he talked about if you say something wrong, then you lose half the church, or is it?
No, when he's talking about you've got that one big donor.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, it's a temptation you have to wrestle with as a leader of a church. If you have someone, and actually a friend, a mentor of mine, told me that typically with churches, and I found this mostly to be true, if you have a church of 200 people, your budget will be approximately $200,000 a year, give or take. I mean, that can change astronomically if you have a big donor. So let's say if someone's a millionaire and they give $20,000 a month, how much is that? Basically 2, 4, 6, 8, 10.
That's basically like $200,000 a year. Yeah.
And so if you have a church of, let's say, if you have a church of 200 people, and if your budget is $400,000, then that could be a sign that you got a big donor. So the concern with that is I don't know how you could not in your mind be like, okay, like that funds, let's say, our entire staff.
Yeah.
And so if I make this person upset, then we're not going to have any staff anymore. Because like maybe the $200,000 goes to community stuff, outreach, operations, building maintenance, whatever. And so like that funds your, so then it's like, oh man, that's a really difficult space to be in. Yeah. And so then you let things slide potentially. It can just be a really kind of terrifying thing. But I think it's a temptation that a lot of pastors have to grapple with. I choose not to know how much people give. But for our church size, I don't think we have a millionaire. If so, it would be news to me.
There's actually just one person tithing.
Yeah,
nobody else does. There's a joke. We know people.
But it is the idea of church discipline, though. I mean, I think in our current culture, church world, you have the side that's like they're hardcore in disciplinary action, almost to a fault, with a lack of grace.
Yeah.
And then you have the other side when there's like nothing. You know, it's like it's maybe a slap on the wrist.
Yeah.
But then you see things like some of this abuse stuff that's coming out, and you find out that pastors knew about it 20 years ago, and they just decided to not do anything when they probably should have called the cops.
Yeah.
Or, you know, gone the right legal channels and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And maybe they were a big donor. I don't know the situation, but I think you're right. I think we have not done very well as a culture, church-wise, following in the example of church discipline for what Paul lays out. And I don't think it's legalistic. I think it's like, gosh, the other thing I think about is a parable. I don't know if we've talked about it yet. It's kind of all blending together. But there's a parable Jesus talks about. The farmer plants the seeds.
Yeah.
And then someone else comes by and plants weeds.
Yeah.
And then they're going to pull out all the weeds, and the farmer says, no, like they have to grow together or else you'll take away everything.
Yeah, at this stage you can't.
Yeah, at this stage you can't. And so Jesus says basically that's how it's going to be at the end. Well, God will do the sorting. And I have comfort in that because I don't think that gives an excuse that we don't follow in church discipline, because I think we need to and really have a high standard for following in the example of Jesus.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's really difficult and it's really hard.
I think the most terrifying passage of Scripture, at least in the New Testament, is Jesus, talking to the crowd. And he says, many of you will come to me in the end and say, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? Did we not cast out demons in your name?
And Jesus, I don't even know you.
I don't even know you.
Oh, it's so terrifying.
Yeah, and I think it's not even like he said, no, you didn't. It says, I didn't know you.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
Yeah.
Like the shepherd knows his flock. Mm-hmm. And so I think about verses like that, and I'm like, those are the things that keep me up at night. You're like, am I doing this for the right reasons? Am I like
check your heart type of deal?
Yeah.
It's I'm convinced that humility is the most important aspect of following Jesus.
Yeah.
Because you have to take a look in yourself and see your own issues and your own sin and all that stuff, and really be able to take those to the cross. And as Jesus says, deny yourself, pick up your cross and follow him. We talked about yesterday, when Jesus says that to the crowd and to people, he has not resurrected from the dead yet. Mm-hmm. And so he's basically saying, you have to die for me.
Yeah.
And people are like, what? That's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, but this is what it is. It's denying yourself, say no to all of the things that your sin nature is pulling you towards, the temptations in your life that you will inevitably face, and then follow Jesus instead. But yeah, it's the parable of the weeds. I think we're talking about at the end. I think I added it on. It wasn't even because I used a commentary book that helps me kind of go along. But I was like, I really need to add this weeds and the seeds growing together one, because that's hard, because we always talk about the pain and the suffering in the world, and we can kind of bring in Israel-Hamas stuff on this one.
Yeah.
Basically, I think Jesus is saying there will always be evil in the world, but in the end, I will be the judge, and I will sort this all through.
Yeah.
But until then, there's going to be a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. And it's interesting because I'm not a big end times guy, as in using the Bible as a treasure map of
it's now.
If you correlate the original language to this, then Jesus is going to come back on this date at this time. And some people kind of sadly, when things go wrong in the world, they kind of use that as like a fear tactic to
Yeah.
And people, I don't know. I'm not a big end times guy, but I look around what's happening in the world right now, and you can't help but be like,
you can't help but just be like, maybe now.
It's
maybe?
Like no one knows when Jesus will return. It says Jesus says, not even I know, only the Father knows. But you look around what's happening, not just Ukraine and Russia, Israel, Hamas. And I don't know if it's just because the modern news puts all the bad stuff. You're talking about like wildfires, at least in our country. You have tsunamis, you have earthquakes, you have Maui burned, like a whole city burning, and you just look at all that stuff, plus all the violence in our country and the gun violence and the shootings, and it's just like, man.
Yeah.
And I know we've talked about as a whole in our planet, Christianity is growing in other countries, and so I'm not saying God's not moving kind of in the chaos, but it's like you look around and you're like, man, we're definitely a day closer to Jesus' return than yesterday.
Yeah.
And every day, and it's like, but then I go up and I think when World War II was happening, most definitely people were like, Jesus is coming back, and I would have been there. I'm like, people are specifically going after the Jews and all these concentration camps and stuff. I'd be like, this is it, man.
Like,
Jesus can come back at any time.
I just think we don't understand, like, World War II. Like, it's a world war. Everyone is at war, millions of people dying, like, just insanity.
Yeah, and it's interesting the day of age we live in now, we're just not used to that. One, because, we were both born in the 90s, and the world's been pretty dang peaceful.
Yeah.
I mean, you've had flare-ups for sure, but there's been no, giant world wars and,
No.
And
like, neither of us got drafted.
No. And Mark Sayers, we listen to his podcast sometimes. He's a pastor of Australia and just wicked smart. It's been talking about how since World War II, really the economic structure of the whole planet has shifted, where now it's basically countries have to get along for everybody to make money because there's so much, product going here and there. And now tourism.
Yeah.
Like if you think about the majority of human history, you have not been able just to pop over to someone's country and be like, oh, check it out, this is cool, and then leave.
Yeah.
That's never happened before.
Yeah.
Usually you do that, you would die.
Yeah.
I mean, not, you understand what I'm saying for the most part. But so it's just interesting, the new dynamics we have, and now it's shifting where it's like, okay, Israel, Hamas, and I'm not super familiar with it. I'm by no means any expert. I've done some recent research, but really the conflict goes back generations.
The conflict,
it's biblical
the conflict goes back 10,000 years.
Yeah.
Like it's been there forever. I mean, Francis Chan in this video, it's a little bit longer. It's like 54 minutes.
Did you post it on YouTube?
Yeah, it's on YouTube. I can link it in the description below. It's really good. It's called the Israel Project. They go to Israel and they're walking around all these. I don't think maybe if you've been to Israel, my wife's been to Israel.
Okay.
And my wife was baptized in the Jordan River.
What?
For starters. Yeah. I was like,
why'd she go there?
It was a Corbin thing. Yeah.
Nice.
And like the Mount of Olives and the garden and the temple, all these things, those are real geographical locations that you can go to today. When Jesus stood on the hillside, like all of these, when Jesus is preaching and all of these things, when he goes into the temple courts and overturns the tables, that is a place that you can still stand today. And I think that's a really important thing to remember for us as believers, but even folks that aren't believers, is that there's like historical accuracy to these things happening. It's not just like, there's debate if you go into the Old Testament of like, well, what sea was parted by Moses? There's debate on stuff there, and then like, what is it? Is it Zion? What mountain that they refer to fairly often? I don't think it's Zion.
There's a couple that they have debates on. What mountain Jesus went up on, when the devil tempted him. Some people think it's anyways.
But then it comes down to like a language thing of like, well, this word actually means the highest thing you can see from where you're currently staying. So I think it's really important for us to remember that like these are real places that you can go to in real time and see, like when you read Romans and Acts, like there are places where these events took place. And remembering that, as much as Scripture is like the Word of God, it's also a history book, that you can go to and learn things. But I think what's really important to remember is, if we are in the end times, I say if, I'm not an end times person either.
Yeah.
But I think I've gotten more like, oh, this is interesting. If we are in the end times, it's important for us to remember as believers that this is not a time to like kick back and be like, sweet, you know, I'm
100%.
saved,
Like,
I'm
give
good,
up.
like
Throw in the towel.
take
All
me
right.
home, you know, which I think is like some of the, I think that's like some of like maybe the Christian nationalist views of like the Lord is coming, and I think some people act like, oh, he's returning to Washington D.C., you know, like
He's coming through the clouds above the White House.
exactly, like no, he's not, he's like we know where he's coming back to, you know, or at least scholars believe that it would be Jerusalem.
Sure.
You know, so it's like, no, he's not coming here. You know, like
Yeah.
we are an insignificant nation in the grand scheme of all things that God has planned. You know, like, but it's important for us to remember as believers that the harvest is plenty and the workers are few. You know, like now is not the time to sit back and relax, but like now is the time to be out and sharing the love of Christ.
Be the salt of the earth.
Exactly, to be the salt of the earth and to bring people in a time where people just assume that that's not what our hearts are.
Yeah.
You know?
You think about it like with the apostles, they believed Jesus was coming back in their lifetime.
Yeah.
And they weren't like, all right, let's just kick back and
wait
till he comes, you know? So yeah, it's fascinating the day we live in today. And like the Israel Hamas thing, there has been so much tension, even like in our country, about like how do we respond. I'm not even talking about in a military sense, like how much support. It's more of like ethically, what do we do?
Yeah.
And I think the things we've seen, the debate was it an unprovoked attack? It sure seems like it, but though there's been conflict from both sides for a long time, and they both probably treat each other fairly poorly.
Yeah.
Obviously. But the images that have been coming out have been just horrific.
It's horrendous. I mean,
awful.
yeah.
Like children, families going, and it's just like this is. I mean, it's atrocious.
Yeah, and I think
it has to stop.
I remember a few years ago, a lot of, especially out of like Bridgetown, when I mean everything was happening with, I think some of this was like pre-George Floyd and a lot of that stuff. But like what was interesting is a lot of folks talking about like, is Christianity a non-violent religion? Which I think, oh man, you just got to be so careful with your terms.
This is a good conversation.
You know, you just got to be so careful with how you define things. Like my dad was in law enforcement, and you know, there becomes a point where you cannot love someone into, like if you know, my dad is called to like a domestic violence, like at times there is a healthy amount of force required to keep some people safe.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's, some people would say, well, that's violence. And I'm like,
Self-defense, violence.
Yeah.
It is a tough question, though.
Because people, you know, bring up Peter pulling out the sword and chopping off the servant's ear. You're like, well, that was in self-defense. You're like, okay, there is an argument there. I don't agree with it. But
yeah, I think that's a specific time. I mean, this is a really difficult conversation. I have a friend of mine who's a pastor, and we talk about this stuff a lot because they believe, like, I think there's a biblical argument. This is the debate that we have. He says, I think there's a biblical argument that as Christians, we should never basically act in self-defense. And I have some scripture examples. I can't do them off the top of my head today, but there's some out of like the Old Testament, stuff like that, where obviously people are defending themselves and stuff like that.
yeah.
So in my personal opinion today, I'm like, I think, as you said, there has to be a healthy level of discernment.
Yeah.
But I think in some cases there are, you know, a time for war, a time for peace, as it says in Ecclesiastes.
Yeah. Which is interesting because we're talking about Israel, like a Jewish nation, and we all know those verses in the Old Testament where God's like, cut down every man in the city. You know, put them to death with the sword.
Joshua and
Yeah, and you're like, oh, that's a gruesome picture.
Yeah.
And then you look at what's happening right now with Israel and Hamas, and you're like, oh man, like this is the framework that they look at things in. I'm not saying that they're like the leader of Israel's like cut down every man in Gaza. I don't think that's what they're doing. But it like, how do you respond when someone launches missiles into an apartment building and kills like 1,000 people? Like, how do you respond to that? Like, and is that a place for you to turn the other cheek or go the extra mile? You know, like what's the...
Dude, it's hard, man. And
Yeah.
I think the challenge is like, I don't know if I have the answers.
Yeah.
I
don't
think-
have the answers.
I
don't envy anyone who's in those positions. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just really hard. And I think we just have to pursue Jesus. I don't know if this is like a cop-out answer, but I'm like, I don't know. In my heart right now, I'm like, yeah, you would respond. I don't know if this is the correct answer or not, but you'd say like, hey, like this is completely not okay. Maybe it's like a boundary. If you're like, no, you cannot just shoot missiles at whatever and kill people. Like this is completely unacceptable.
Yeah.
This is a horrific act, and you will be disciplined accordingly. You know, until it stops.
Yeah. But then it's hard when like you're disciplining people who, you know, build their military bases under hospitals.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, or next to schools, you know, it's like, well, what do you like?
I don't know, man.
You know, it's like when the other side is playing dirty, like how do you not stoop to their level? You know,
It's so hard, man. It's I don't even know. Like if someone broke into my house at night, let's say, I think both of us would respond with violence if someone was trying to harm our family.
Yeah.
And I think that's okay.
I was in, we were doing outreach at Wallace Marine Park in the homeless camps the other day.
Yeah.
And someone had a sign on the little shelter that they had built. It said something like, I should have taken a picture of it. It was like prayer is the best way to speak to God. Trespassing's the fastest.
That's hilarious.
And I was like, that's interesting.
So going back to what you're talking about, Joshua and the killing of when God says, go kill every man, woman, child, and let there be nothing left, basically. So actually, I listened to a podcast by AJ Swoboda and EJ Gupta, plus I think someone else was talking about this. Oh, man. Because there's some different theories, because we read that and we're like, why? Like in the New Testament, when, you know, you have the Old Testament God, New Testament God, and that's one of the biggest kind of challenges as a Christian. It's like, well, they seem like two different, like Jesus says, turn the other cheek, but God's saying, you know, wipe out everybody. And it's interesting. One of the theories I read was basically that when God says wipe out man, woman, children, the whole town, let nothing be left.
Yeah.
He's using it as kind of like a hyperbole. He's not actually saying go kill the women, go kill the children, whatever.
Yeah.
He's saying go take out everything. Because in some of these passages it says, hey, wipe out everyone, women, children, the whole thing.
Yeah.
But then in coming verses, it says, but do not intermarry with them. And so it's like, well, how
do you intermarry with something that doesn't exist?
Correct.
Yeah.
And so in the same way, in our language, like if someone's playing a football game, and if we say, oh man, the 49ers obliterated the Raiders. We're not saying that the Raiders literally got obliterated by some nuclear bomb. We're saying that they got beat very badly. And so in the Hebrew language, it could be used as that same kind of a hyperbole where it's like, hey, go take out men, women, children, everything. Like obliterate everyone. And it doesn't mean you go individually every house and slaughter women and children. It's more, hey, just have complete victory.
Yeah.
Like make sure get everyone out of the town. Like I don't know if it means when people run away, like chase after them and then like kill the children. I don't think that's because why would it say the intermarriage? So that's just something I've been thinking about.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of I don't know. Some of those Old Testament passages are tough to grapple, and even like the question of like the violence and stuff, and like how do we respond? And the other thing I will say is like with the Israel Hamas and and the Ukraine and Russia, and then all like these other stuff. Then you have China, and then there's like the borderline between Taiwan, and it's like they're always prepared for an invasion.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think part of the stress of today's world is like we feel like we have to have a professional opinion on
Totally.
on everything.
Yeah.
I'm like, I have no idea
No
about
idea what's happening
Chinese politics with Taiwan. Like, I've watched like a 30-minute YouTube video of like the conflict.
Yeah.
That's literally all that I know.
Armchair expert. Yeah.
Yeah, like I know absolutely nothing. Even Israel and Hamas, like, okay, I know a tiny bit,
Yeah.
but I know that I don't like war, and I know that death is destructive and terrible, obviously. Yeah. And I've seen the images coming out. I think that is horrendous, and I think we should pray, and that God will give us guidance that the war will cease. Mm-hmm. Like I don't have a professional opinion on these things.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah. Man, that's such a good point that we all feel like we have to have a professional opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's definitely okay to have an opinion.
Sure.
But back to that humility thing of like, my opinion on Hamas, Israel means absolutely nothing to anyone. You know, we're having a conversation about, and I think one thing that I want to really emphasize with this Israel Hamas thing is if you're a believer, it's really important for you to understand the history of Israel. Mm-hmm. And I would recommend watching that video with Francis Chan, because he explains a lot of that, of like, we forget as believers, Israel was God's chosen people.
I think they still are, yeah.
And some there would be some debate on, like, are they still God's chosen people? Or are they not? And I'm like, dude, I don't think you can read the Testament and see God's faithfulness to Israel and not think that they're still his chosen people. And I think it's so important for us to see, like, what does it mean to be a chosen person? And what does it mean to hold a covenant with God? I feel like the only thing that we have reference for when it comes to covenants is marriage. Mm-hmm. And that, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of what's happened to marriages specifically in the United States, but I mean, you just read the Old Testament. I pulled up, it's like the most quoted verse in the Old Testament by the Old Testament, Exodus 34.
Okay, what's it say?
Yeah.
I thought it had been Deuteronomy, but it's Exodus 34, huh?
I think it happens again in Deuteronomy, though.
Okay.
I think. But it's the first place it happens is Exodus 34, and then when the covenant's renewed, it's spoken again.
Okay.
So Moses is up doing the Ten Commandments for the second time, the new stone tablets, because he broke.
No, he smashed on the ground.
Come on, man. So Moses chiseled out.
Come on, Milk. What are you thinking,
What
bro?
are you doing? So in Exodus 34, starting in verse 4. So Moses chiseled out 2 stone tablets like the first ones and went up on Mount Sinai early in the morning, as the Lord had commanded him. And he carried the 2 stone tablets in his hands. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and stood there with him, and proclaiming his name, the Lord. Now, here's an important verse. And he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation. And Bible Project does like an entire podcast series on
that singular
this
verse.
passage of scripture, because there's so much packed into it. I mean, we're using Yahweh, like Lord in all caps. So this is like God talking about himself, like explaining like, hey, this is who I am. This is my characteristics. And in literature for them, you put the most important thing first.
Yeah.
So the most important thing that God wants us to know about him is he's compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin.
This is the crazy thing. If God's slow to anger, we're pretty terrible people. You know what I mean, though?
Oh, man.
It's like, I mean, when we think about even like the Old Testament and the wrath of God, and I'm like, people were messed up then. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about that, I think, on the last episode before that. People messed up now. Like, we are in desperate need of a Savior. And without God, we're messed up people.
Yeah.
I mean, that is powerful. And then the third and fourth generation thing too. I mean, it's fascinating.
You know how someone explained that? Actually, Tim Mackey from the Bible Project explained that in the most brilliant way.
Mm-hmm. He's wicked smart.
Yeah. So imagine we both have kids. Mm-hmm. Imagine you go to the playground. Mm-hmm. And there's a bunch of kids there, a bunch of different parents. And some other parent is like, hey, Johnny, leaving in 2 minutes. And the kid just throws a huge tantrum. Mm-hmm. She has a fit. And then all the other kids start throwing a fit. And they're like, well, and, something happens and, Johnny throws a fit and then your kid throws a fit. And it's just this whole mess of like these kids like being disobedient and not listening and like throwing a tantrum and throwing sand at people and all this stuff. And then, you guys finally get home, you sit down. Like, you have to hold your child accountable for that, right? But they didn't start the meltdown, right? They didn't start the chaos. Like, oh, my kid's usually great at leaving the park, but Johnny had a meltdown, and so my kid had a meltdown. So when you sit down to punish your child, say like, hey, we're going to sit down for 5 minutes, and we're going to, relax and think about it, and then have a conversation. That is revisiting the playground sins. And going back and visiting like, hey, it's not like, oh, hey, your great grandfather murdered someone. Well, you're being punished.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's this like this brokenness that permeates generations that continues to cause this perpetuating sin. That's what.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it was a really, I was like, Tim Mackey explained it way better, the whole playground thing. But when he explained it in that way of like, I'm like, oh yeah, you're stopping and you're going back and like, hey, this thing that happened that caused chaos and brokenness, like we have to revisit that, and like there has to be atonement for that. Like, man, that's so wild.
I think that's incredibly important, and I think that's how you break like in our family timelines today. You can only make it through it if you acknowledge that it's there. Yeah. So like in that example, I would say tantrums, like if you just moved on with your life and like, let's say your dad had tantrums at the playground and then his dad had tantrums at the playground and then his dad and then you did, like if no one ever talks about it or has awareness or acknowledges it, then you're never going to be able to grow and move forward.
Yeah.
Until someone's like, hey, let's talk about that. And if you have the ability to look within yourself and be like, Pete Scazzera says famously, Jesus lives in your heart, but your grandpa lives in your bones.
Yeah.
And I think that ties to it where we bring along with us all of these different, family systems and how our families function. And if we don't have the ability to have the awareness of, then it's going to continue.
Yeah. I feel like we're just slowly walking down AJ's points from that.
From his talk.
Because that was his first point was just understanding your origin story.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for us, but I really think for us as believers, understanding, I don't think we had dinner at my parents' house last night, and I was talking to my dad about Israel Hamas, because he's just really good at staying humble, but educated on a lot of these things. And we were talking about, I was like, I didn't realize, because I wasn't alive yet, Israel did not exist as a country for like almost 2,000 years.
Yeah, was it in the 50s, 40s?
50s or 60s.
Yeah, they sent them back to Israel, correct?
Yeah. So back to the old city, and they just became a country again. And my dad was telling me, 11 minutes after Israel declared themselves a country, the United States accepted them as a sovereign nation.
11 minutes?
11 minutes.
That's amazing.
I haven't researched that, but yeah. And I was like, to think about like going back in history and looking at the temple construction from, from the tabernacle to David and Solomon building the temple and it being broken and then being rebuilt, and then the time of Jesus and, him saying, destroy this temple and I'll rebuild it in 3 days, and all of this just beautiful literature, and just seeing God's faithfulness through thousands and thousands of years. And then to look like, oh, we're like 2,000 years since Jesus was here. And this nation that God has been faithful to for thousands of years vanishes for 2,000 years, and then all of a sudden in the 60s, they just reappear.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not a big end times guy, but I'm like,
But it is.
yeah,
But it is and so before you leave a mean comment, go watch the video with Francis Chan. But Francis Chan talks about just the timeline of how things have happened in the Old Testament and how it's 2,000 years from the temple being built to being destroyed, and then 2,000 years from being destroyed to, whatever, and then 2,000 years from Jesus to now. So you have 2, 4, 6,000 years, and there's supposed to be a 1,000-year reign. And God really likes the number 7, and so we're kind of ripe in that time for, a 1,000-year reign, plus or minus a few hundred years.
Who knows?
So I think, again, if you believe this stuff, then there's certain things we should be doing. The harvest is plenty, the workers are few.
Yeah.
The love of many is going to grow cold. It is time for us to push harder into our faith, because the persecution will get worse, know.
I think that's
it's the time.
If it is. And again, when I say I'm not a big end times guy, by that I mean I'm not like the type that's like the end of the world is coming. Some people like to do that. But I mean, for sure, you cannot see what's happening in the world right now and be like, oh, everything's fine.
Yeah,
situation normal. There's just things like, as you said, Israel from the 60s coming back. The war that's happening right now all over the world, the earthquakes and all that type of stuff. Some people would say like, oh, it's just because we have better technology to detect these earthquakes and stuff. Like, potentially that's true. I don't know.
Yeah. And just we have so much more access to news these days. So much. I mean, it's overwhelming. Because a few months ago, the Euphrates ran dry. I don't know if you heard about that.
I think I did see that because that was another biblical prophecy thing that popped up.
That was one where I was like, I mean, if you build a dam,
is that what happened?
Yeah, there was a dam, and they were holding back water for a reservoir, and so everything on the downstream side of the dam dried up. You're like, well, duh, that one was kind of more of that's going to happen when you put a dam on a river. So it's some stuff like that where we need discernment to say okay, not quite.
Okay, let me read this for you.
Yeah.
Matthew 24, 6-13. This is Jesus saying this. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines, earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of the birth pains. That's pretty crazy.
Don't be alarmed.
Yeah, don't be alarmed. But secondly, that's just the beginning.
Yeah.
Jesus says his birth pains. And then he's, as you said, the persecution thing. And then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death. And you'll be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from their faith and will betray and hate each other. Again, I will say some people have the interpretation that Jesus is speaking about the fall of Jerusalem in this. It depends on your interpretation. At that time, many will turn away from the faith, will betray and hate each other. Many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved.
Oh, love of most. Not many.
That's an NIV translation.
But most.
Yeah. Interesting. I think more accurate probably many, but it's NIV trying to help us out, I guess.
It's over 50%.
Yeah. But man, it is kind of...
Be the salt.
Be the salt. It's kind of given me a new courage because as an avid people pleaser myself and as a pastor in this day and age, I don't know, if you just think about hey, this is coming to an end. It could be my lifetime. It could not. I don't know.
Because that is the reality. It is coming to an end.
That is the reality. It is coming to an end. What is our responsibility in that? To be the salt of the earth.
Yeah.
To go and, the kingdom of God is a mustard seed.
Yeah.
Small. We get to do what we can.
Starts with a little podcast like this.
I just think that we are at a moment in time right now. In our culture, there's definitely a walking away from faith, but at the same time, maybe what God is doing is pruning. And Pete Scazzero has a famous story actually, it's an ancient Chinese, I think, kind of story where he says sometimes things happen in our life and we think that they are cursed, but the reality is they're a blessing. I don't want to say the story because I'll butcher it, but kind of like in our culture today, we're like, oh man, like church is in decline. We've talked about the stats, but maybe overall, God is preparing us for fruit in the future. And it might not look like what it did in the past. It might not be, mega church expansions and growth.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a movement of discipleship and a relationship with each other, where, there's a movement of God in that way.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's going to be, but maybe like when we're in our 60s or 70s, it's like, okay, like looking back, we can see that God was most definitely moving and working.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
It's a crazy time to be alive, though.
It is.
I mean, with like the United States economic stuff, if you want my personal opinion, I think we're going to be in an economic shift in the next 12 to 24 months.
Is that your expert opinion?
That's my expert opinion. No, don't go beyond that. My non-expert opinion.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes in economic challenges, I think there's great benefits for the gospel in there too.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, there's some stats I came across. I think in COVID, people in the United States had the most money in their savings accounts as ever before. Wow. And I think it's been wiped out in like 16 months.
I do believe it.
Yeah, because I think people are living above their means.
Yeah.
I was watching a video recently, I think it was yesterday. It was yesterday. He was talking about how our generation, let's go down a rabbit hole, but millennials and Gen Z, we have better wages than any other time in our country's history, but we also have less wealth than any other generation.
Huh.
So like, it's harder to build, even though we get paid more today, it's harder to build wealth today than in the past.
Interesting.
So like stock market wise, equity wise in a home and all that, because it's so much more expensive to get in.
Yeah.
So I did think of the differentiation between wages and wealth.
Yeah.
And how that has shifted.
Yeah.
Where back in the 80s, you could buy a house and have it paid off within like 10 years. And a house costing like $12,000.
Yeah.
I mean, 70s, but I know. If I could go back in time, but your wages were less. But what I'm saying is the wages have definitely gone up, but things are so much more expensive. It's harder to build wealth.
Yeah. No,
today.
I totally see it.
That's not me being a whiny millennial. I'm just saying. I think it's a fact.
No, it's funny. I was having this conversation with, I started a Patreon page.
Oh, nice.
And I was having a good friend of mine sent me, Patreon just did a big rebrand and stuff. And I work in video production. So like creating things is what I do, as you can see. But we were having this interesting conversation of there's a lot of creators that complain about how like the algorithm is broken, and they complain about like the machine up here is like I can't make money because the algorithm's broken and nobody sees my work. And I was just like, man, like, I think there's such a massive temptation in our culture right now to just not be content. Mm-hmm. And I found like one of the most beautiful blessings God has given me is contentment.
Nice.
Of just being able to look at our, we don't own this house, but like we are so blessed to be in a house like this.
Yeah.
And like, I'm looking at our financial situation personally and just the economic landscape. And I'm just sit back and I'm like, I don't think a house is really in my future.
Yeah. You're just like, I'm with you.
And I'm like, man, that's totally fine. Like,
well, I'm not a failure because of it.
No. And I think that's so important for us to remember. I mean, this is more encouragement than like biblical foundation here. Mm-hmm. Just like, man, like I remember when my wife and I moved to Memphis, I was working at the Portland REI and I transferred to one that they were just about to open in Memphis. And it was like the first week we were there and I was helping this lady with a pair of hiking boots. and we were just small talking and whatever. And she wasn't from Memphis. I also wasn't from Memphis. She just asked me where I was from. I was telling her Oregon, and she's like, "Oh, honey, the only thing I can tell you is grow where you're planted." Like, just know, like, Memphis is like, for someone like me who loves the outdoors, like, Memphis is not where you want to be, And I think
I've never been to Memphis, but I believe you.
It's it really grew on us in the time we were there. But I think it's really important for us as believers to remember is if we're walking with Jesus and doing what He's calling us to do, like, He has a plan for us, And I think far too often we try and the soft prosperity gospel creeps in, and we think like, well, I'm being faithful, like. I'm being faithful, so God's gonna bless me with a house. Or like I posted life went kind of sideways for a little bit when we took Lincoln, the little newborn we've had for over 2 months now, and I had posted an update video on my YouTube page about like, hey, life's going crazy. We've got these 2 foster kids and it's beautiful, but I haven't been posting a lot. And someone posted on there, a very, very kind person, said something like, oh, like you're doing foster, like. You're going to be like blessed and successful or something. I was like, I don't think that's like, I see the virtue in what you're saying of like, I'm doing something good. So God or the universe, whatever you believe, is going to bless me in return.
Yeah.
And I'm not here for the reward now, and we're not supposed to be here for the reward now, I don't foster to get a reward out of it, cause right now, like, I was up till midnight cleaning the house last night, and then the baby woke up at 3 because he was hungry. And so I'm like, I'm a little sleepy this Monday morning, But yeah.
That's like the eternally minded thing,
Yeah.
So
can I say something really quick?
Yes,
on that?
please do.
Sorry. My good friend, Matthew Macera, there's that.
I think we've talked about Matthew almost every episode. Maybe 50% of them.
But
Be Bold Street Ministries, shout out.
Be Bold Street Ministries. His thing is, there's that phrase like, oh, they're so heavenly minded, they're no earthly good. He hates that phrase.
Really?
I think passionately.
Wait, they're so heavenly minded, they're say it again.
They're so heavenly minded, they're no earthly good.
Oh, yeah, that doesn't make much sense to me.
It doesn't make much sense. And he's like,
who says that? I've never heard that phrase before.
I've heard it before. People say like someone who's just so focused on. I get what they're saying.
Yeah,
but I get the but I'm like, no, like you cannot be so focused on Jesus that you're no good to the earth.
Yeah,
that's not how this works.
Yeah.
Oh, hang on. The camera battery died.
Oh no. Okay, so
yeah,
I wanted to talk. So we're talking about YouTube. I have a deep concern. This is kind of my own deal.
Okay.
I have a deep concern for Mr. Beast on YouTube.
Really? Okay.
Yes. So I have followed him for, maybe, but before he was super famous. Now he's the largest YouTuber on the planet. But back when he was like, just giving tons of money to, homeless people or, it was like right after he did the videos of like counting to 100,000 or something like that. Because that's how he got famous. Did you know that?
I had no idea.
That's how he started making a name for his channel. Is he live streamed himself counting to 100,000? I think it took like 30 hours. That's what he did. Anyways, so Mr. Beast is the most successful YouTuber on the planet. I think I saw a video the other day that he's valued at being worth over $1 billion now.
Yeah.
He himself.
Yeah.
He gives away a ton of money. He puts all the money back into his YouTube videos. My concern is for him in just watching him is that it seems like, I could be completely wrong in this, it's just from an outside perspective, that there is his entire identity is built on the success of his YouTube videos. Because he says, I just want to do more, I just want to do better, I want to make the best videos ever. And he has been incredible to avoid any controversies. He's the most subscribed to channel behind T-Series, I believe. He's got 200 million subs now.
Wow.
And he gets hundreds of millions of videos per video that he makes.
Yeah.
But my concern is when this goes south and does not go well, how is that going to affect his mental health? That's my concern because he has like 10 channels. Everything's been up and to the right for like probably almost a decade for him.
Yeah.
Maybe not that long, 8 years or something.
Wow.
7. But I'm like, man, in that position when you're just like, and I watch a lot of interviews that he does. He's like, I just want to make the best videos and I want to make videos people love. And I'm like, well, that's cool, man. But
Striving for excellence is not a bad thing.
Yeah, I'm just concerned for him.
Yeah.
And like what happens when you're not famous anymore?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't last forever.
Okay. I'm going to heap one on top of that.
Okay.
And then we can talk about it.
Yeah.
We should put a disclaimer here. I think OnlyFans is the same thing. Because they're striving.
How it's going to ruin people's lives?
Well, there's that. But I think you're striving to make the best content possible. Because it give people the best experience possible. But in the it cannot. But we're so so short-sighted with it that we can't see that it's not going to last forever.
Yeah.
You can't be on top forever.
I think OnlyFans is one of the most terrible things that our society has created in a long time. So if people are not aware,
hey, in our defense, it's British. So,
it is?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure
okay.
it's pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's British.
So in my understanding, OnlyFans is a site where you can post pictures, and then people subscribe and pay to see the pictures that you post.
Pictures and videos.
Oh, pictures and videos.
Yeah.
That is a horrendous.
Well, and
it's not art, people. We're not talking about art. And the sad thing is, typically,
if you want a site that allows you to post pictures and videos for artists, it's called Patreon.
It's what does that teach?
It's London. Yeah.
What does that teach teenagers, young adults, men, women? When you're basically, and the thing is. I think you said that you saw an interview or a news article that some of these OnlyFans people are making like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
I mean, millions. I mean,
millions of dollars.
So to preface this, I fell down a YouTube rabbit hole, not on OnlyFans, but there's a podcast called the Whatever Podcast, where this guy's name is Brian. Sometimes he has 10 guests on at a time. And a lot of them are younger younger college students, 18, 19 years old that have OnlyFans accounts. And some of them are top earners. They're in the top 1% of earners on OnlyFans. Some of them are middle of the road, but they're still making
$500,000 a year or something.
Yeah, they're still making $500,000 a year. And you're just that is insanity. And I think I wanted to take this back to being this conversation with OnlyFans back to being the salt of and I don't listen to all the podcasts or even the full length of the podcast. They're 5 hours long, but it just hearing these gals, sometimes guys, talk about their the lifestyle choice that they've made. I'm just man, you don't. You can't I have the benefit now of being 10 years older than these people. And I've even just very recently being able to look back and being man, I was dumb at 18.
Just, me too, man.
Just I remember when I was in my mid 20s, someone talking to me about there's things that you don't know, and there's things you don't know that you don't know. And the things that you don't know should terrify you. And I'm looking at these they're kids, and I'm just oh my goodness,
it's there forever as well.
Yeah, it's on first of all, it's on the internet forever. Second of all, those things get leaked to leak websites all the time. Your stuff is not behind a paywall, And I'm just oh my, you're you can't see, my heart breaks for you because I can see where this life goes for you, And I'm just man, what's going to happen when you're no longer on top? And now you dropped out of college because you're making $10,000 a week, and you're I don't need college. I'm going to drop out and do this for $10,000 a week. And then 5, 6, 8, 10 years from now, now you have nothing. Your income's gone. You're now living above your, I'm just man, I want you to see what this does to your body, to your mind, to your future with
Self-worth.
relationships. Yeah. What's gonna you've built up this, and I'm speaking hypothetically, you've built up this empire essentially. If you're making $10,000 a week, you have an empire. You've built
a ton of money.
You've built up this empire that's 100% dependent on how you look physically.
Yeah. At what cost?
At what
is the empire
cost?
built? Yeah.
You know, like, and it's like, so much emphasis is put in, something that is even scripture says like beauty is fleeting.
Yeah.
Like
it's just crazy to me that in this day and age, like people view that as a career.
Yeah.
So like there's a young guy we had at church a while ago, and I was hanging out with him and talking about their family, and I was like, "Hey, what's your?" And he's like, "I have a sister." I'm like, "Oh, what does she do?" And like, "Oh, she does OnlyFans." I was like, "What? Like as a career?"
Yeah, that's like something you put on your resume now.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
But I'm like, on a societal level, it's just this is like I understand the internet has been used for wonderful things and for the spreading of hope and the gospel and healthy communities, but this is the dark side of the internet.
Yeah.
What is that training or the next generation? Again, mostly female. Mm-hmm. Man, it's so sad. And as a father I've got 3 daughters. Like, man, that's horrendous.
Yeah.
I don't ever want a girl to think that they have to basically sell their body to thousands of men.
Yeah.
For their self-worth or for income.
Well, and I think it gets worse now because it's so. I think before, like maybe, like 5-6 years ago, there was this like. There was this. I think the atmosphere around it was much more like it was a much more niche thing. Like not everyone was like to get into it. It was like you were overcoming something to get into that. Now it's just like. Signing up to be an OnlyFans creator is just as easy as signing up for an Instagram account.
Wow.
And you're just like,
yeah,
like, it's just like it's like, oh, I can take pictures of myself and sell them online and make money while I'm in school. Like,
yeah.
All right, cool.
I was unfamiliar with even what OnlyFans did or was until it started coming out in the news articles that like professionals were getting fired from their jobs.
Yeah.
Because it was like found out they had an OnlyFans account
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
School teachers. There was a school teacher. She's making like, $60,000 a year as a school teacher, and the school found out and fired her. And she's like, "Well, I'm making $10,000 a month on this, so okay."
Yeah,
and you're just like, "Oh,
it's just like what?" I mean, we kind of went down this angle of what does that do to you mentally? Mm-hmm. Basically, selling your body, and then like, what if you have an accident?
Yeah.
What if your body is no longer what it was?
Yeah.
And then like, what are you gonna do?
Yep.
You have no self-worth. You get depression. I mean, it's sad to me. But also, it's as we've talked about many times on the podcast, our societies, they have to be up and to the right forever. You always have to be making more money. You always have to be, on top. Mm-hmm. But then the question is, on a biblical level, what is on top?
Yeah, the Jesus.
Bottom. Yeah, exactly.
The first will be last.
Yeah, the first will be last. The last will be first. That's not saying that, again, wealth is bad and having money is wrong. If it becomes your God, obviously. And so maybe even when we talk about this kind of OnlyFans conversation and selling for thousands of dollars, selling yourself, it's like maybe there's greed behind that too. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like I can make however much money, I can live the life that I want, and this is all that I have to sacrifice. But the question is, what are you sacrificing?
Yeah.
At the beginning, it seems worth it. But as you said, when you're in your early 20s,
yeah,
or late teens,
your
brain's not fully developed yet.
I'll just say it, man. You're so dumb. When you're like it's not, and it's not like I'm not saying that to like say, oh, these girls who do it are dumb. Every 18-year-old is dumb. Every 18-year-old makes dumb decisions. I made dumb decisions when I was 18 because there's so much you are forced into a world where you know so little.
Yeah.
So little.
I'm hoping that as I continue to live my life, it's not like when you're 30, you look back when you're 18, you're like, oh man, I did not make smart choices. Yeah. I hope it's not the same when I'm 40, you look back when I'm 30.
Exactly.
You're 80.
Exactly.
80, you look back to your 70, you're like, oh man. I mean, obviously, I think you're you're still learning and still growing always, but I don't think the mind isn't fully developed till you're 25.
Yeah. Your
men or
cortex.
Women.
Yeah.
I think women mature faster, but I don't think either brain is fully developed till you're 25.
Yeah. It's just so crazy.
In fact, there's been some shootings in Salem recently, and I'm a police chaplain hanging out with police.
Yeah.
And sadly, they have been teens.
Yeah.
And the cops I've heard having conversations saying like, hey, teenagers are very in a shooting situation for a police officer, for officer safety. It's very dangerous more so
Yeah.
than an adult, because they might make a really not wise decision because their brain's not fully developed yet. They don't understand, like, if they do this, they could spend their life in jail or, you know, the consequences behind it.
Yeah.
And so for them, it's like an officer safety thing. It's like, whoa, it's a very concerning. A teenager with a gun is more concerning than an adult with a gun.
Totally. And I mean,
Just because the brain is not developed yet.
and you just think about, I've done some work with, I know a counselor who got a grant to go take 4 kids who are it was all for youth with incarcerated parents. And I mean, all of these kids have been to juvie. They all have records. 2 of them have brought guns to school and been expelled. And they're great kids. They're really intelligent, and but you look at their home life and you look at their family and you're just like, and linking this back to, I want to go back to Mr. Beast, but linking this back to OnlyFans of like, man, there's so much brokenness that happens when like the family becomes broken, you know? And I was listening,
Guarantee the OnlyFans girls probably do not have healthy family systems.
no. And
That's not a guarantee, but
that's part of the podcast. They were going around talking and every single one of them, parents have been divorced for one that I was listening to. And, I was up late last night cleaning and listening to this. And I was just like, man, like you can never go backwards from that. Like I have like my wife and that is the only partner I have. You can't, and the only partner I've ever had, you can't go, and there's other situations and God redeems beautiful things. And you know, there are prostitutes that are used all over the Bible. I'm not saying, I'm not shaming anyone for that, but you can't go from like being an OnlyFans creator to like having one partner ever in your
like
entire
intimate relationship. And stuff.
It's like you can't go backwards from that, you know. And there's just so much. I think the like, and I feel like as a society, it's really hard for everyone to connect the dots to say like, oh, well, there's this rise of OnlyFans and the rise of the broken family, you know, like how those aren't correlated, are they?
What else
you
is
know?
interesting is what you don't understand and see the consequences of like if you're a famous OnlyFans person, let's say, there's a lot of creepy people out there,
Dude.
And so I get like if you have a mass following,
Yeah.
you're gonna have stalkers.
You have 99% weird dudes. You know, like I'm like,
you can have like people stalking you, showing up at your
Yeah.
house, and then you have to do security detail, and
yeah,
dude, that's wow.
I mean, pornography is an issue, and there are great people that struggle with pornography, and that's a thing that they struggle with, and that's like that's not totally okay, but that's like in our society that's a normal thing to struggle with now, right? But I think like, there's a lot of creepy people out there, you know, like you're not like you're not making content for like the Leonardo DiCaprios and the top 1% of society, you know?
And I think what we're talking about as well is we should not be defined by the actions that we take.
No.
Though there are vast consequences, like you said, like those kids brought gun to school. That's a bad choice.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean they're a bad person.
Yeah.
In the same way when people, you know, make poor choices. And I think that's kind of where the redemption of the gospel comes in.
Absolutely.
Where it's like, hey, you are worth more than the foolish decisions that you've made.
Well, and I think this goes back to revisiting sins, right? Of I think I'm safe to talk about Matt Massera in this way. He shares testimony so much, but I mean, he was in drug addiction for 27 years, you know, and that does harm to your body. And he is, I mean, like a spiritual mentor to me. I love that man. He's incredible, walks with the Lord faithfully, encourages others, is making disciples, is out bringing people to Jesus. Like God has 100% redeemed his life and turned his life around, all for the gospel. But and he has had miraculous healings of things that shouldn't have healed that did. But there are still things that take a very real toll on his body because of his past. And that is like if you're an OnlyFans creator or if you have a porn addiction, God, like Jesus redeems those things. You know, I mean, those stories are all over scripture. They're all over history, all over our lives right now. But that doesn't change. It doesn't always change its impact on your life and the lasting consequences of that.
Again, we'll talk about AJ That's what Boda is talk. He said, we are to lead from our scars, not from open wounds.
Oh my gosh.
I know, that's so deep,
Man,
right?
we
So it's
should
like-
have just played AJ's talk for this. It was so good.
And so like there's a pain from the choices that we've made.
Yeah.
But Jesus heals them.
Exactly.
And we lead out of our pain and which is exactly what Matt's doing. It's
Yeah.
just like he's
Yeah.
made some terrible
Leading out of
mistakes in his
scars.
life, which he would be honest about.
Yeah.
But he says, hey, Jesus has healed me. Yeah, I still have scars, but Jesus has overcome.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hope, and that's why I have hope for the gospel in our community, in our country, that even though you see societal regression sometimes,
Yeah.
and you see people selling their bodies online, which is just so sad to me, and you see people with addictions, the pornography addictions, drug addictions, that's why it's like we say Jesus is the hope of the world. I have a pastor, a friend of mine, not necessarily a friend, but I wish he was my friend, but he said he doesn't like when pastors say the church is the hope of the world. And so I've tried to rephrase that because it's true, because we're broken people.
Yeah.
But the church brings the message of hope,
Yep.
which is Jesus.
Yeah.
And so if you're listening to this, like whatever you've done, whatever decisions that you've made, it's nothing that Jesus cannot overcome. Like
Exactly.
we've talked about, if your OnlyFans account, addicted to pornography stuff. As Bryce said, I don't want people to feel so much shame, like God's not enough for them.
No.
Jesus isn't enough for them. Jesus is more than our choices. That doesn't negate the fact that we have consequences sometimes.
100%.
And that's what fires me up as a pastor, when I see people start to see that their identity is not in what they've done, but in who they are.
Yeah. I just to quote a quick verse
Yes,
for that real
please
quick.
do.
I had
Please
to look
do.
it up because I didn't want to get it wrong. Romans 8:1. Therefore, there's now no condemnation for those who are in Christ
That's
Jesus.
good stuff.
I think that's I want to make sure people walk away with that, because that's the beautiful thing of the gospel, And I think you going back to Israel, Hamas, and I promise we'll get back to Mr. Beast in a second, but like Israel,
many
Hamas,
topics.
Israel, Hamas, and being the salt of the earth, and all of these things of like what it comes down to is like bringing people to relationship with Jesus. Like there's no condemnation in the gospel. Like if there is condemnation, then why did Christ die for your sins? Mm-hmm. Like that doesn't make any sense. Like he, like I just think it's so important to have a good theology of atonement and the sacrifice that Jesus took for us, because it really puts into perspective that there is no condemnation, because God took everything, all sins, and he took them to the cross for each and every one of us. Doesn't matter if you're an OnlyFans creator or you have a pornography addiction or you're Mr. Beast or whatever, like that is all covered. And if you're in Christ Jesus, there's no condemnation. Conviction.
Yeah.
But no condemnation.
And then through that, the goal is that Jesus transforms your life. And I think what I've been reflecting on is hopefully it changes the way that we live.
Yeah.
So it's like, Jesus helps us overcome the addictions to pornography.
Yeah.
Where, we don't just continue the same behavior. But I think that also only happens with the community of the church. Because I think in isolation,
Oh man. Yeah.
that's why James says, confess your sins to one another.
Yeah.
And I think there's power in that, because then we understand. I think what the devil likes to do is make us feel isolated, where we feel so much shame. Like what the devil says in our life is that we are the only ones that struggle with that specific sin. So you can't share that, because people will just look at you and be like, how terrible are you as a person? I can't believe that.
Yeah.
But the reality is everybody struggles.
Yep.
But if we confess those, that's how we can overcome it.
All
I think
have sinned
we've
and
talked
fallen
about.
short.
That's right. I think we've talked about my buddy who's an addiction therapy counselor, and he said to the highest success of addiction recovery is replacing the addiction with a healthy relationship. So typically, when people use, I mean, there's the chemical side of things, like the actual physical addiction,
Right.
but usually when people use, it's tied back to an immense shame, guilt, and so if you replace that.
Yeah.
When you feel shame to now, I need to connect with a quality friend, that you have a higher success rate.
Yeah. Who spoke first at the pastors conference?
AJ. No, AJ did, yeah.
No.
Oh, Daniel.
Daniel.
Pastor
Yeah.
Daniel Malaputi from Roseburg.
Oh man, that was something that came out of his. Was he said the best times in my life are when I have a close friend.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm just like, oh man, like, and his warning of my big takeaway from his talk was, you don't get a warning for when you're going to need a close friend. You know, it's not like someone sends you a letter and is like, hey, in 6 weeks, a terrible thing's going to happen. You're going to want to work on your best friendship, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think, man, and I think that's the thing, like you were saying, if you're the only one in the world that struggles with this, you know, that struggles with doubt or that struggles with lust or whatever, like, that's just not true. Or I mean, you know, Satan's goal is to isolate us. And we are living in the most isolated generation, the most lonely generation that has ever existed. You know, and I think that's, man, it's so important to have community and good people close.
That's why I'm pumped for the future of the church.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Mr. Beast, man, I like
Mr. Beast. And he actually has Christian roots if you research him.
Yeah.
He went to a private Christian school, and I believe his I think Romans 8:1 used to be like on the tagline of his banner picture on his YouTube page.
Oh, wow.
Or some verse in Romans.
That's so cool.
And like you can see early comments that people have done like some research on that he has, which it makes sense because for him, if you look at the synopsis of his videos, it's very much give back to the community, love people. And so, I think there's biblical roots in the way that he does things.
Yeah. I think, man, for him, I just hope, man,
I'm just concerned for him.
Yeah. I think I remember I was listening to a kind of a podcast, a YouTube thing with, the big unboxing guy. He's been doing it for a long time.
Lou?
Yeah.
Unbox everything?
Yeah. Lou later.
Unbox Therapy?
Unbox Therapy. Yeah. He has a spin-off channel called Lou Later, and he was doing an interview with, it was either Peter McKinnon or Gerald Undone that I was listening to. And it was crazy because he was talking about how, like, he's one of the original YouTubers. Like, he's been on pretty much since the beginning. But he was talking about how he's like, people build up this persona of me that isn't me. It's like they get maybe 10% of me from YouTube. You know, they don't get the Lou who's going to his kids' soccer games and, you know, having dinner with the family. You know, like you just get the 10% of Lou that's on YouTube, and then you build an entire person out of that. You know, and so I think that's important too. As someone like Mr. Beast is like, I hope there's good stuff going on behind the scenes. You know, and he's like got a good head on his shoulders and is, you know, taking that time for rest and knowing why he's doing what he's doing. Because he does do wonderful things for the community. Yeah. I have a very, very good friend of mine. His brother-in-law is Zach King. And Mr. Beast did they rented out like a football stadium and did a giant hide and go seek thing.
I watched that one, yeah. Like it was a bunch of YouTubers.
Yeah. And Zach King won like $1 million and then gave it all back into foster care. Because he and his wife they've done foster care, and
that's cool.
And it's just so like, you're like, these are just big name YouTubers who just played a giant game of hide and go seek and then gave all the money away. Yeah. You know, that's so right. Like, that's a beautiful thing, you know? And I think that's man, if I could say anything to the older generation that's, you know, like maybe a little Luddite-ish against, you know, the YouTubes and the Instagram, like, that's a beautiful thing coming out of this. It's like there's community there. Like, there's people gathering and taking money that they earned from the platform and giving it back into the stuff, you know? So, yeah. Anyways, yeah, I don't know. I have hope for Mr. Beast.
No, totally. Anyone that builds their identity, and again, I don't know him as a person, so I could be totally wrong, but anyone that builds their identity on success, I have concerns for them.
Yeah.
Or I should say American view of success.
Yeah. I wonder if, I feel like it's we can just sit here and speculate like what is success to him, you know, because
and that's my concern though, because the interviews I've watched is I want to make the best YouTube videos anyone's ever made, but the concern I have is, dude, you can't keep going.
Yeah.
the videos he's making right now, I think they cost him millions and millions of dollars to produce each one.
Oh, it's like a movie, each one.
Yeah, every single one. And I'm like, and he's investing all the money, which is cool. But I'm like, what are you going to, eventually people are going to get tired of it.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, oh, it's going to be like someone new and cooler is going to come.
Yeah.
And he's going to be, tier 2 or tier 3.
Yeah.
Eventually, I'm talking maybe like 5-10 years down the road. And what's that going to do to his mental health? I don't know.
Yeah. Who knows? I think, and I mean, yeah, it's just, yeah.
But to close out.
Yep.
There's hope in the gospel.
Yeah, there's hope in the gospel. Go be the salt.
Go be the salt of the earth. Be salty.
Yeah, go be salty.
Okay. That's it.